Have you ever heard a story so unbelievable it feels like destiny itself wrote it? Imagine this: a young nurse, humble and kind, spending her days bathing and caring for a millionaire who lay silent in a coma. Until one fateful morning when his eyes suddenly opened. And what happened next changed not only their lives, but touched the hearts of everyone around them. Stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will move you deeply. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel Gentle Words, where true, heartfelt stories come alive just for you. Life has a way of weaving stories in silence, stories no one expects until they suddenly unfold before our very eyes, and this one began in the quiet corridors of St. Mercy Hospital, where machines hummed with their steady beeps and whispers of hope filled the air like fragile threads keeping broken souls together. And among the many nurses who dedicated their days to healing, there was a young woman named Clara, only 24 yet carrying a heart far older than her years, a heart molded by hardship, compassion, and a devotion to serve those who could not help themselves. And though she earned little, and though her own life was far from comfortable, she never allowed her smile to fade, for she believed that sometimes a gentle hand and a kind word could do more than medicine itself. Clara had been assigned to a private room in the upper ward, a place where only the wealthiest of patients rested. Yet the man who lay in bed number 17 was not a man who saw the luxury around him, for he had been locked in a coma for nearly 2 years, a millionaire by name, power and wealth, but reduced to silence and stillness, his life hanging on wires, machines and the mercy of time. His name was Richard Hemsley, a man once known for his commanding presence in business, his sharp eyes that could strike deals in moments, and his reputation as someone untouchable in the financial world. Yet now he was nothing more than a fragile figure lying motionless, his face pale, his body weak, as though life had retreated into a corner of his soul, waiting for something greater to awaken it again. Many doctors believed he would never wake, that his brain had already crossed a line beyond repair. But Clara never treated him as though he was gone. Instead she spoke to him every morning, whispering updates about the weather, the sunrise, and the smallest happenings in the ward, as if he were listening. And when she bathed him, carefully moving his unresponsive limbs and washing away the sweat that gathered on his skin, she did it with the reverence of someone who believed dignity should never be lost, not even in silence. Some of the other staff found it odd. They laughed lightly when they saw her talking to him, calling her the nurse who believes in miracles. But Clara never minded, for deep inside she felt a strange connection to Richard, one she could not explain, as though her voice, her presence, and her touch were holding on to a part of him still alive behind the locked doors of his coma. Each day was the same ritual. She would adjust the curtains to let in the morning light, sit by his side and say, "Good morning, Mr. Hemsley, it's another bright day." Then she would check his vitals, record them neatly, and finally prepare the warm water, soap, and towel to bathe him. And as she worked, she hummed songs her mother used to sing, soft lullabies that carried peace, and though Richard never stirred, she always imagined that somewhere deep in his mind, he heard her. What Clara did not know was that in those quiet mornings, in the stillness of the room, her presence was not entirely lost on him, for inside Richard's broken world, her voice was like a faint light, reaching him through the darkness, keeping him tethered to a life he had not fully left behind. But outside of that hospital room, Clara's life was far from easy. She lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of the city, supporting not just herself but also her younger brother, Daniel, who was still in school. And though their parents had passed away years ago in a tragic accident, Clara had taken the role of both mother and sister, working double shifts when needed, sacrificing her own dreams so Daniel could have his. She rarely complained, for she believed that every sacrifice had meaning, and even in her weariness she found joy in helping others. Yet deep inside, a hidden sadness lingered, the loneliness of carrying burdens too heavy for one so young. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's dedication never wavered. She became almost like a shadow in Richard's room, his unspoken guardian, his silent companion, and sometimes she wondered who he had been before fate silenced him. She read articles about his empire, the businesses he had built, the charities he had once supported, but also about his reputation as a stern, almost cold man, one who rarely allowed emotions to show, and it made her curious. For the man she tended to felt so vulnerable, so fragile, that she could not imagine him as someone feared and admired. One winter morning, the city lay under a blanket of snow, and Clara entered Richard's room as usual, humming as she drew the curtains open. letting the pale sunlight fall across his face, and she noticed something she had never seen before. A faint twitch in his fingers, so small she wondered if it had been her imagination, yet it stirred her heart with an unfamiliar rush of hope, and she whispered, "Was that you, Mr. Hemsley? Did you hear me?" The monitors beeped steadily, unchanged, and his face remained still, yet Clara's heart raced, for in that fleeting moment she felt certain that something was different. Days passed, and she watched more closely, noticing tiny signs. An eyelid that trembled ever so slightly, a faint shift in his breathing when she spoke, and though others dismissed it, saying it was normal reflex, Clara believed otherwise, her intuition telling her that Richard was on the edge of waking. Then, one morning that would change everything, Clara had just finished bathing him, gently wiping his face, when suddenly his eyelids fluttered, and his chest rose in a deep, uneven breath, his lips parting as though trying to form words, and Clara froze, the towel trembling in her hands, tears instantly welling in her eyes as she leaned closer, whispering with a trembling voice, "Mr. Hemsley, are you coming back to us?" Slowly, painfully, Richard's eyes opened. Blinking against the light, confusion swirling in their depths, and Clara gasped, pressing the emergency button even as her hands clasped his, but before the doctors rushed in. Before the chaos of medicine and procedures filled the room, Richard's gaze found hers, locking onto the young nurse who had never given up on him. And though his lips barely moved, she heard the faintest sound, a whisper like wind, "You," before the machines beeped louder and the team rushed inside. For the first time in 2 years, the millionaire had awakened. And his very first moment of awareness had been filled by the presence of the nurse, who had believed in him when no one else did. And from that instant, a story began to unfold that neither of them could have ever imagined. The news of Richard Hemsley's awakening spread through the hospital like fire in dry grass. Doctors and nurses who had long accepted his silence now gathered in awe, each one whispering about miracles, about science defied. But none of them knew the truth of what had truly pulled him back. It wasn't the machines, nor the medicine, but the voice, presence, and tireless care of Clara, the young nurse who had given him dignity even when he lay trapped in stillness. In the days following his awakening, Richard's mind fought to catch up with time, confusion and weakness clouding his thoughts, his speech barely a murmur, but always when Clara entered the room, his eyes followed her, clinging to her as though she were the only anchor keeping him from slipping back into darkness. He remembered flashes from his long coma, fragments of sound and warmth, the soft hum of lullabies, the gentle touch of someone wiping his forehead, and most of all, the steady voice that spoke to him each morning, telling him the world was still out there waiting for him. Those threads had kept him tethered, and now, seeing Clara in flesh and bone, he realized she was no stranger but the very reason he was alive. Doctors called it a miracle of medicine. Newspapers soon labeled it the awakening of the century. But when journalists tried to press questions on him, Richard's tired voice only whispered, "She saved me," though no one understood the depth of what he meant. Clara, humbled and overwhelmed, continued her work quietly, still treating him as she always had, with care that came from the heart, not from recognition. Yet, slowly, a bond began to blossom between them. Richard, once known for his ruthless business mind, now found himself softened, seeing the world through new eyes, the eyes of a man who had been given a second chance. As he regained strength, he asked Clara about her life, about her sacrifices, and each word she spoke carved deeper into his soul, for he had been a man who lived surrounded by luxury yet knew nothing of genuine love or sacrifice, while here was a young woman who had nothing yet gave everything. Richard began to notice details: how she smiled even when tired, how she spoke gently to patients others ignored, how she carried burdens far heavier than her delicate frame, and one evening, as he sat by the window for the first time in years, watching the sunset, he whispered, "Clara, you gave me back my life, but I want to give you something too." She laughed lightly, brushing it aside, saying that his recovery was reward enough. But Richard meant it, deep in his heart. Gratitude began to transform into admiration, and admiration into something he had long thought impossible for him: love. Weeks passed and Richard grew stronger, learning to walk again with determination that stunned his doctors, and with each step, Clara was there, cheering him, steadying him, and though society saw him as a powerful millionaire rising again, he knew the truth: he was a man rebuilt not by wealth, but by kindness. When Richard was finally discharged, the hospital halls echoed with applause, yet his eyes searched only for Clara, the nurse who had walked every step of that miracle with him. And as he stood by the hospital doors, reporters shouting his name, He turned instead to her and said in front of them all, "I owe you everything." Clara, blushing, whispered back, "You don't owe me anything, you just needed someone to believe in you." But fate had more in store. Richard, once a man who thought business was all life had to offer, began visiting the hospital even after his recovery, not as a patient but as a man drawn back to the one who had saved him. He supported projects that funded care for patients who could not afford it, he started scholarships for nurses, and when Clara questioned why, he smiled and said, "Because you showed me the value of hearts over numbers." Slowly, the walls between them dissolved, and Clara realized that beneath the title of millionaire, Richard was simply a man yearning for connection, for love and for redemption. Their bond grew, unspoken yet undeniable, until one evening, under the glow of the hospital garden lights, Richard took her hands trembling and confessed, "I was lost for years, not just in the coma but long before it. You woke me in more ways than one. Clara, will you let me walk this new life with you?" Tears filled her eyes, for never had she imagined that her kindness, her humble devotion, would lead to such a moment, and with a soft smile she whispered, "Yes." The story that began in silence, with a nurse bathing an unresponsive man, ended in a miracle of love, proving that sometimes, the greatest awakenings are not of the body but of the heart. And so, dear listener, if this story touched you, if you believe in the quiet power of kindness and second chances, then let this be a reminder that miracles do exist, often hidden in the smallest acts of love. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel Gentle Words, where every story is a gentle reminder that hope, love, and compassion can change lives in ways we never expect.